Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. I've got a project today for you that I'm pretty excited about. It's a long overdue, but I've got these canisters that I prepped a little while ago. And today, we're gonna use at least one of them to forge a ball bearing Damascus hatchet. All right, just ignore the mess here. I'm normally a very tidy person, just ask my wife. Get the dust out of these canisters. I'm gonna go ahead and put both of these together, and we're gonna forge weld both of these up because I'm not entirely sure how much we're gonna need. One of these canisters will make a small hatchet, but who knows, we might want to make a slightly larger hatchet, and depending on the amount of material loss that you always end up getting, we might need both. So, I'm going to be using these ball bearings that came out of some sawmill somewhere, probably in Idaho. A good friend of mine gave me these that he got from a millwright, and these are going to make a great pattern. We're going to add some powdered steel. This is 1080 powder with 2% pure nickel powder. That's going to give us a nice contrast from this high carbon steel of the bearing balls here. The gaps between these bearing balls is pretty significant because they're larger. Well, if you had like an 1/8 inch bearing ball, it would be a lot less space, obviously. So we're filling up quite a bit of void here. So we have two nice canisters filled up with ball bearings and powdered steel and some nickel. The next step is to heat these up and squish them so we forge weld them into one solid mass of steel. All right, I spent a little bit of time working this down to a nice billet. I had to come back and grind out a few inclusions on the billet, which are very typical for ball bearing Damascus, and then forge it back out to the the clean dimensions that you see here. And my original concern of not having enough material for a good hatchet were completely unfounded, because we do in fact have plenty of material for a very nice medium-sized hatchet for sure. And we're looking at about 3.5 inches by 1.25 inches by, what is that, about 2. So definitely you can go for a nice medium-sized carving style or kind of bearded hatchet. But this is a one-off, so I don't have to really follow any particular pattern. I'm gonna let this cool down, and then we'll heat it back up and move on to the next stage of forging this hatchet.
So I'm using my forging press a lot for this project, as I do whenever I forge axes or hatchets. It's not necessary to use a forging press, but it definitely makes the process much easier and quicker. And if you're trying to make money doing this, that's kind of necessary. So you saw me forging or punching in the eye to this hatchet. And once that's complete, it has to be done from both sides. Then you've got a little plug that comes out. You can then begin drifting the eye with a series of drifts, as you see here. I think I use a total of 3 on these hatchet-sized eyes, and that gets it up to the proper dimensions. Before we go much further on the eye, I'm forging in the beard or the dropped portion of the axe bit. You can't do that later in the process without deforming the eye of the axe, and so I'm going to forge out the bit most of the way before continuing on with drifting out the eye. These round dies provide a much more aggressive surface area to forge out this axe bit. It also helps me form the steel in the directions that I want it to go, to try to make the shape that we want for this project. Sometimes it's tedious because you can't touch the material you're working with at all except by holding it with a pair of tongs. And so sometimes figuring out how to hold that material while you're introducing it to the dies is one of the biggest parts of the process. This is the second drift in my eye forging process, and this is the one that I forged the cheeks out on. Now I didn't get this on camera, but I'm hammering this drift in and then taking it to the press, where I'll use some other round dies oriented with the perpendicular to the drift, and we'll forge the cheeks out as you see here. And now I can push in the second to final drift size. It's actually the same size as the final drift, it's just shorter to use it on the press. Try to keep the forged lugs on that axe from being squished in too much there while pushing the drift from the underside. So at this point the eye is almost finished, and I can finish out the bit, or very close to it. These dies are for forming that nice curve up from the bit to the transition to the eye. So we've got a nice even sort of radius at that juncture. Just doing some adjustments here on the anvil, trying to get that bit where I want it to be off of the main part of the axe. Finally, we can go to the final drift, which like I said before, is the same size essentially as the one we used on the press the last time, but this one's longer, and I use it to get the finished dimensions and the straightening on the axe. The hatchet head has been normalized and annealed
The next thing to do is to heat it back up and harden it, and then we can temper it. But first we need to clean the profile up. Now that the axe has been fully heat treated, we can finish the grinding process, and this project differs a lot from a typical axe project in that the entire surface has to be ground off and finished so that we can etch it and reveal the Damascus or pattern welded pattern that we've put into it. Normally I wouldn't be doing this, obviously, just simply leaving a nice forged finish on the axe. But this also required making sure that we had a little bit of extra material on the overall build in the forging process earlier. I've got the whole thing ground down to 220 grit, and now I can put on the bevel and then do some hand sanding on it to get the finish up to where I need it. We're building a custom axe handle, of course, from a 1-inch hickory plank, the best axe handle material that I'm aware of. I've got to get it fitted to the axe head, and then I can finish the handle once I take it back off while we etch the axe head in ferric chloride to bring out the pattern. I really think this project will look great with a scorched finish on the axe handle, and so that's what I'm doing here. You'll notice that the wood that I selected has a combination of heartwood and softwood, and I think that gave us a little bit of trouble in the scorching process because they're going to react a little bit differently to the heat. So after I made a mess with my linseed oil, I had to do a little bit of straightening on the axe handle with some heat, and I was able to get it back to nice and straight again. Now for the final fit up, I've got a walnut wedge, some nice wood glue, put this thing together. All right, guys, thanks for coming along on this project. I'm going to show you pictures of it in just a second here once the oil dries up a little bit. But appreciate you watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks to my helpers in this last bit of the video.